All right, let's get cranking. Here we go. We've got the continuance of chapter, and we are now on characters and complexions. That's going to be interesting. Let's see what he has to say. Last time, though, we specifically went over how even in the desert that you had a lot of fear, and you had to travel without fire so that you wouldn't be raided. That families would be at each other's throats, but yet still follow the sheik, who actually did things by example. So, because that's really the only way you can rule over anything out there in the desert, which is why Lehi and Nephi, they all do love and persuasion as much as possible, despite Laman and Lemuel's murderous intent, which, of course, is common among families living on the edge of life and death all the time. All right. So here we go. Characters and complexions. Authorities on the East have often observed that the Arabic, and lesser extent the Jewish, character is remarkable for its two faces. On the one side, the Semite is thoroughly proud and noble, the soul of honor, the impeccable family man, the true friend, faithful to death. And on the other, the low and cunning tramp, the sly assassin, dangerous companion, an unpredictable rogue. Every page of Doughty reflects this strange paradox of the desert character, which has received its classical treatment in the third chapter of Lawrence's 7 Pillars of Wisdom, pure gold mixed with the basest dross, and all within a single family. And where can one find a better illustration of that than in Lehi's own household? For that matter, it comes near to being the leitmotif of the Book of Mormon. It's amazing. Coincidentia oppositorium. Oppositorium is the clash of black and white. With the Arabs, to be white of countenance is to be blessed, and to be black of countenance is to be cursed. Keep that in mind. Okay, so there are parallel expressions in Hebrew and Egyptian. And what of Lehi's people? It is most significant that the curse against the Lamanites is the very same as that commonly held in the East to blight the sons of Ishmael, who appear to the light-skinned people of the towns as a dark and loathsome and filthy people, full of idleness and all manner of abominations, an idle people full of mischief and subtlety. See 1 Nephi 12:33 and 2 Nephi 5:24. It is noteworthy that all the descendants of the Book of Mormon Ishmael fall under the curse. See Alma 3:7, as if their Bedouin ancestry predisposed them to it. The Book of Mormon always mentions the curse of the dark skin in connection with and as part of the larger picture. After they had dwindled in unbelief, they became a dark and loathsome and a filthy people, etc. Because of the curse which was upon them, they did become an idle people and did speak in the wilderness for beasts, did seek in the wilderness for beasts of prey. 2 Nephi 5:24. The statement that God did cause the skin of blackness to come upon them, verse 21, describes the result, not the method, which is described elsewhere. Thus we are told, Alma 3:13 and verses 14 and 18, that while the fallen people set the mark upon themselves, it was nonetheless God who was marking them. I will set my mark upon them, etc. So natural and human was the process that it suggested nothing miraculous to the ordinary observer. And the Amalekites knew not that they were fulfilling the words of God when they began to mark themselves. It was expedient that the curse of God should fall upon them. See Alma 3:18. Here God places his mark upon people as a curse, yet it is an artificial mark which they actually place upon themselves. Let me read that again, because it's crucial and critical. Here God places his mark upon people as a curse, yet it is an artificial mark which they actually place upon themselves. The mark was not a racial thing, but acquired by whosoever suffered himself to be led away by the Lamanites. See Alma 3:10. Alma, moreover, defines a Nephite as anyone observing the traditions of their fathers. That's 3:11, which makes the difference between Nephite and Lamanite a cultural, not a racial one. Does this also apply to their dark skin? Note that the dark skin is never mentioned alone, but always as attending a generally depraved way of life, which also is described as a direct result of the curse. When the Lamanites become white again, it is by living among the Nephites as Nephites, i.e. adopting the Nephite way of life. See 3 Nephi 2:15 through 16. The cultural picture may not be the whole story of the dark skin of the Lamanites, but it is an important part of that story, and it is given great emphasis in the Book of Mormon itself. There is nowhere any mention of red skin, incidentally, but only of black or dark and white, the terms being used as the Arabs use them. I'm so glad he put all that in there, because I was about to go off on those same lines, and he did obviously a much more thorough and better job than I would have. But it really is just that, and people who are against the Church of Jesus Christ try to use that whole discussion as in, see, they're racist. And it's like, dude, do you understand that at the end of the Book of Mormon, that the Lamanites are more righteous than the Nephites? Has it ever occurred to you that maybe it's about the idea that everyone can come unto God? That people self-select and choose to part themselves? I mean, if you want a modern version of this, especially with cultural divides among those people who are either very liberal or quite conservative, if you were in a crowd of people, could you pick out those who are liberal, like very liberal? I would say you could probably do that with a 90% chance. How, you ask? You look for the purple hair and the nose rings. Yep. Bet you anything. If you just said, okay, all those with purple hair and with nose rings, what's your political alignment? Are you more liberal or more conservative? They would probably self-select themselves as liberal. Is purple hair and dyed hair and nose rings racial? No. That was a self-selecting mark that they put on themselves. And it's the same thing with all sorts of ways that we mark ourselves for the culture or subculture that we want to identify with. Those who identify with being grunge or goth or punk or hip-hop will dress accordingly. Gangs mark themselves in their own specific gang methods. Those are the subcultures that they identify with, right? People who are conservative may not have any markings at all. It doesn't matter what race they're in. It doesn't matter what background they come from. It doesn't matter who their ancestors were. Just the idea of, it makes it hard when you have zero markings of subculture on the outward appearance. It likely shows that you are at least more conservative. So even if you are a liberal, but you have no outward markings, you don't have any dyed hair, you don't have any extra earrings, you don't have any more holes in your face than you normally would, it doesn't mean that you are 100% conservative. No, it just means that you are more conservative than those who are more liberal and showing it on their outward visage. And I would say that, yeah, there are things that the people who are really conservative also do that mark themselves in that subculture. They'll wear their red hats and they'll wear their, America t-shirts and other things like that, and show George Washington riding a velociraptor, shooting AK-47s with F-16s riding overhead or something. You know, the ones who are like proudly patriotic, which is awesome, and other things like that, right? So there are subtle clues and there are not so subtle clues, but I would think that is an extremely easy, low-hanging fruit example of people choosing through marking themselves to advertise the subculture that they identify with, that they adhere to, and want to show that they are a part of, and that the Lehi and Nephi and the whole Nephites group versus the Lamanites group, it's going to be the same thing. The Lamanites mark themselves through, and whether, so they do mention dark skin, it could be because of how they lived their life. It actually had an impact on their outer skin, whether that's they spent a lot more time in the sun. Maybe that was part of their idleness. I don't know. It depends on what were the cultural norms back then that defined the two, that caused that to occur. Because it was something that was obviously reversible. So, you know, and there must have been cultural and outward depictions that were different. Because when you get into the war chapters, there's a couple of Lamanites who had converted to the Nephite cause, who were of the anti-Nephi Lehis. Which is really, yeah, I think anti in that case probably meant before, meaning that they were one people, because if you have the antediluvians, people before the flood, the anti-Nephi Lehis, I would think were the people before Nephi Lehi. They considered themselves to be, hey, we're just part of the original group of everyone being together. That's my suspicion on that one. But, you know, they were of Lamanite descent, and they said, hey, could you go in there and kind of act as a spy or a messenger, so that way we're just not automatically killed. So there's obviously something that actually has an outward appearance that makes a difference. But again, the purpose is not to be racist. The purpose is to show that there is a physical difference that occurs through whatever choices they made in the way they lived their life. Just like purple hair nose rings versus red MAGA hats and boots and trucks or something. I don't know. Pick what you want. You can kind of tell, right? All right. So, place names in the desert. The stream at which he made his first camp, Lehi named after his eldest son. The valley after his second son. See 1 Nephi 2:8. The oasis at which his party made their next important camp, we did call Shazer. That's 16:13. The fruitful land by the sea we called Bountiful, while the sea itself we called Iriantum. By what right do these people rename streams and valleys to suit themselves? No Westerner would tolerate such arrogance. But Lehi is not interested in Western taste. He is following a good old Oriental custom. Among the laws which no Bedouin would dream of transgressing, the first, according to Jennings Bramley, this is from 1908, is that any water you may discover, either in your own territory or in the territory of another tribe, is named after you. So it happens that in Arabia, a great wadi, valley, will have different names at different points along its course, a respectable number of names being all used for one and the same valley. One and the same place may have several names, and the wadi running close to the same, or the mountain connected with it, will naturally be called differently by members of different clans, according to Canaan. Oh, that reference. Sorry. According to Canaan, who tells how the Arabs often coin a new name for a locality for which they have never used a proper name, or whose name they know not, the name given being usually that of some person. However, names thus bestowed by wandering tribesmen are neither generally known nor commonly used, so that we need not expect any of Lehi's place names to survive. And specifically, I can relate with this. For example, when I was a kid, as a scout group, we went down to Goblin Valley. And in Goblin Valley, we made names up for the formations that we saw. Is that what the official park called it? No. It's what we as a scout group called it. Well, like there's a chain of goblins, or hoodoos, if you want to have the proper name there, that were chained together near the front of the state park when you arrive at the overlook. So we called that the Great Wall of Goblins. And then there's this big kind of egg-like dome where here you have all this red rock stuff, and then in the middle of it there's this big dome of dirt that is white and greenish because of the copper that's in there. And so I don't think we named that specifically, but I always liked calling it the egg dome, and that was my own self. And then from that perspective and vantage point of that egg dome, you could look across the valley out to a single little goblin or, hoodoo that was out there. And behind it had the backing of white, but it was this one goblin that looked like a mushroom. And you could call that the lone goblin or the mushroom goblin out there. Unfortunately, that was the one that many years later was the subject of another video of another troop that they knocked it over, and that was a federal crime because they were worried it was going to fall on somebody. It had been there for years, and it would have been there for hundreds of years more if they had not knocked it over, which is really sad, because I like that, because we'd spotted it from way over at the Egg Dome, and we wandered over to that lone goblin, and we thought it was going to be much bigger, but it wasn't. It was about up to waist height. I thought it was going to be above my head, just because it felt so far away, but that was a trick of the perspective of the desert. Here it is, on its own, far away, nothing else around for reference, size reference. So you assume that, well, it looks far away because you can't really tell because it's all just bland red sand between me and there. And so it appears far away, so you think it's bigger than it is. So, yeah, people name stuff. And is it arrogant? Would we not suffer such arrogance? Well, it depends. If people have no idea what the name is, they'll call it by what they want. Family members or, the Grand Tetons are named Tetons for a reason. Especially by the mountain men that saw them at first, because they were very lonely men out in the wilderness. And so it reminded them of things. Then you have just all these other places named after, Deadwood? Deadwood, South Dakota, right? Something tells me there was a bunch of dead wood in that area. So it could be just who gets there and circulates the name enough first. Or it could just be things like that until it sticks. Otherwise, it comes up with naming naturally. And if you have no clue, you'll call it whatever you want until someone corrects you or until someone shows you, well, here's the official thing so that everyone can call it the same thing so we all know where we're at. So until that happens, you're naming it yourself. So I don't think it's just the Arabs, but that's my point. Even more whimsical and senseless to a Westerner must appear the behavior of Lehi in naming a river after one son and its valley after another. But the Arabs don't think that way. Okay, that is true. The whole naming after landmarks, after people, that is, I think, more Arabic. Naming stuff, sure, we'll name stuff all day. But after, your children in one way or another, yeah, that might be more Arab. But the Arabs don't think that way. In Mahra County, for example, it is commonly the case in these mountains, water bears a different name from the Wadi. Likewise, we might suppose that after he had named a river after his firstborn, the location of the camp beside its waters would be given, as any Westerner would give it, with reference to the river. Instead, the Book of Mormon follows the Arabic system of designating the camp, not by the name of river, which may easily dry up sometime, but by the name of the valley. See 1 Nephi 10:16 and also 16:6. Another surprise, Nephi more than once refers to the river of Laman as flowing into the fountain of the Red Sea. Since when is the Red Sea a fountain, forsooth? In the first place, we should note that Nephi does not call the Red Sea a fountain, but speaks to a body of water as a fountain of the Red Sea. To what can he be referring? In Hebrew, writes Albright, the word yam means large river and freshwater lake, as well as sea in the English sense. In our case, we cannot, however, be sure whether the designation yam came originally from the inland, referring to pure fresh water as the source of life, or it referred to the Mediterranean as the main source of the Canaanite livelihood. In the former case, fountain is the best translation of the word, and it is certainly in this inland sense that Nephi uses it. For he employs a totally different expression, as we shall see when speaking of the ocean. The Nile and the Euphrates were anciently called yams, and this has been explained as probably a kind of poetic hyperbole founded upon the fact that they annually overflow their banks. Now, the average width of the Gulf of Aqaba is only about 12 miles, and Musil reports that one cannot look right across it and see, one can look right across it and see on the Sinai Peninsula not only the mountains of the south part of the peninsula, but also the plain extending north. To the south, we had the view of the greater part of the At-Tiahama, South Sinai shore. From the Arabian side, then, the long northeastern extension of the Red Sea for over 100 miles, that is, the sector where Lehi's party possibly first came upon the sea, 1 Nephi 2:5, is not an open sea at all, and is not the Red Sea. It is a broad and elongated sheet of water, like the Nile and Euphrates at flood. And like them, it is not closed water, not a great lake, but opens out to the sea at its mouth, flowing out through the two channels about 5 miles wide each. A glance at the map will show that there is a northwestern extension of the Red Sea also, closely resembling the one on the northeast. This western arm anciently had the mysterious and much discussed name of Yam Suph, S-U-P-H, sea or fountain of weeds or rushes. If it was called a yam, what is more natural than its twin gulf to the east should bear the same designation? The latter certainly was what the ancients, by Albright's definition, called a yam, the word having, whether applied to salt water or fresh, the basic meaning of source or fountain. When Lehi's party first saw this body of water, it was a feeder of the Red Sea, with the spring torrents pouring into it. A yam, that is the very sense that the Nile and the Euphrates at flood were yams. So there you go. More desert life. So I'm wondering what's something that would be comparable. Because if you've ever looked at a map, you have those two little, and it looks like the bunny ears or the peace sign at the very top of the Red Sea. They're like extensions of the Red Sea, is what we think of them now, according to maps. But to them, those are things that are kind of just really wide parts of the rivers that flow into the Red Sea. So that's what he's pointing out. I'm trying to think. Yeah, it's like if you were to go down to Lake Powell, I'm not so sure about Flaming Gorge, but because Lake Powell was basically a lake made among the canyons of the Canyonland, you have all these kind of like fingers of the lake going up these canyons. But instead of viewing them as part of the lake, you think of the main central part as the lake, and you think of these fingers as the wide tributaries that go into the lake. That's how they'd be viewing it. I've never really been down to Lake Powell. I mean, I've driven over it or around it or other things like that, but never spent time on it. Let me put it that way. That's a side tangent I could go on for a while. Water rights in the desert. Anyways, when the travelers reached the ocean proper, we beheld the sea, Nephi recalls, which we called Iriantum, which, being interpreted, is many waters. But why did they not simply call it the sea and be done? obviously because there was no name in their language to designate this particular sea. The ancients regularly resort to epithets when speaking of the outer oceans as the great green of the Egyptians and the great deep of the Hebrews. In Coptic, the last form of Egyptian, the Red Sea proper, was called Feyum Neha, literally many waters. If one wanted to speculate, it would be easy to trace Iriantum back to some derivation containing Egyptian WR, great, and NT, Coptic, naut, standing water. So, weren't, or were not, meaning great water. Or to identify the final Wiriantum. Do you see how that's WRNTUM, Wiriantum, with the common Egyptian Coptic Hebrew Yem, Yam, Yum, C, and the rest of the word with the Coptic Irnate, great or many. But we need not go so far. God, these guys and their languages, it's like, it reminds me of Lord of the Rings. I'm so glad these guys are like anyone who is able to take entire foreign languages and break them down to here's the origins. Like Dave Butler does that a bunch in his book, in the language of Adam, and there's a little bit of it in Jonah Barnes's books, and also with a little bit with Dave Butler. Not much because he's doing but it's there. It's just way cool. It helps clarify so many things. But we need not go so far. It is enough to know that in Lehi's day, the ocean was designated by epithets, and that the seas to the east was called many waters by the Egyptians. The first important stop after Lehi's party had left their base camp was at a place they called Shazer. The name is intriguing. This is intriguing enough that Don Bradley, in his Lost 116 Pages, remember, he's trying to reconstruct what was there. He was pointing out that he suspects that Nephi, in retelling his story, was also kind of showing temple patterns. Or maybe that was in the language of Adam. No, it was in the language of Adam. Sorry. In Don Bradley's book, he was focusing on how it was Nephi was showing that it was his exodus and his establishment of a kingdom righteously and through tradition. Whereas in the language of Adam, the place called Shazer is an important stopping point if you are someone whose mind is focused on the temple. You can use that as a marking spot and a delineation between one area and the next. But anyways, let me continue. So, they had left their base camp and was at a place they called Shazer. The name is intriguing. The combination Shajir is quite common in the Palestinian place names. It is a collective meaning trees, and many Arabs, especially in Egypt, pronounce it Shazar. It appears in the Thagret as-Sujur, the Pass of Trees, which is the ancient Shagur, written Segur, in the 6th century. It may be confused with Shager, or seepage, seepage. I need to remember my Dune. Seepage, which is held to be identical with Sheor, or black water, of Joshua 19:36. This last takes in western Palestine from the form Sozura, suggesting the name of a famous water hole in South Arabia called Shisur by Thomas and Shisar by Philby. It is a tiny copse, Copse. This is, so, to anyone who's not familiar with that word, if I remember right, copse is like a kind of a thicket, almost. I had to look that up one time, and that's why I recall it like that. Let me just double check. It's not commonly used nowadays because we have books that have been continually dumbed down by the printing presses. which I have consternation at. COPSE, cops. Or because of an update to the phone, not be able to type well. Cops. There's to trim or cut a set of small trees and brushwood, to plant and preserve as a copse. A wood of small growth, a thicket of brushwood. So, yeah, I remembered right. Woohoo! Huzzah for looking up vocabulary earlier. So, yes, it is a tiny copse. Something that we would have similarly. Like, if you're not used to the word or used to the concept, if you go out into the wild places in the West and you just find in the middle of the desert some kind of thick undergrowth of bushes and often trees in a small little ravine that is really thick and bunched together, that's a copse. And the reason why is because right down there, there's likely some little spit of standing water that all those plants are like, water! And so they grew nice and strong there. And they just are thick by the bank of that spit of water. Anyways. So, it is a tiny copse. And one of the loneliest spots in all the world. So we have Shihor, Shagur, Shajur, Sheghir, Segor, even Zohar, Shajar, Sazura, Sishur, and Shisar, all connected somehow or other, and denoting either seepage, a weak but reliable water supply, or a clump of trees, whichever one prefers. Lehi's people could hardly have picked a better name for their first suitable stopping place than Shazar. Especially with that list, you can see how they're related. When Ishmael died on the journey, he was buried in the place which is called Nahom. 1 Nephi 16:34. Note that this is not a place which we call Nahom, but the place which was so called, a desert. Now notice the difference here. Let me reread that. Note that this was not a place which we call Nahom, but the place which was so called, a desert burial ground. Jaswin reports that though Bedouins sometimes bury the dead there, the dead where they die, many carry the remains great distances to bury them. The Arabic root NHM, Nahum, has the basic meaning of to sigh or moan, and occurs nearly always in the third form, to sigh or moan with another. The Hebrew Nahum, comfort, is related, but also that is not the form given in the Book of Mormon. At this place, we are told the daughters of Ishmael did mourn exceedingly, and are reminded that among the desert Arabs, mourning rites are a monopoly of the women. Okay. You didn't note it in here, but Nahum was found, the actual place. 1-to-1, Nahum. It was written in the stone. It's there. Like, here, Joseph Smith, upstate New York, third grade education, translating the Book of Mormon when he was 23, 29, 23, something like that. It's been a while since the beginning of this year. He's translating the Book of Mormon. He's, for anyone who's a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, this is like, well, yeah, duh, he's the prophet. Of course, he's just translating what Nephi wrote down, and Nephi was there, right? It seems logical as day. But anyone who just really thinks of Nephi as some sort of fraud, or not Nephi as a fraud, well, they would think Nephi was made up, and that Joseph was a fraud, and this was all just from his imagination. If they really think that, then they're really wrong, because they physically found and they could trace from Nahum because they give exactly, like, they wander in the wilderness for nearly 7-8 years. They get to Nahum, they bury Ishmael there. And funny enough, there is a grave that is engraved with the consonants that would make Ishmael. Is it the Ishmael of Book of Mormon times? Maybe. That's the best we could say. We don't know. Ishmael is not exactly an uncommon name. So, was it the Ishmael Book of Mormon? We don't know. But could it be? Yeah, there's a slight possibility. But we definitely know that specific spot and where that grave of someone named Ishmael is Nahum, and it is so kept as Nahum, and he nailed it 100%. That is a 100% archaeological proof, meaning that is absolutely 100% true. And followed by which, if you follow the Book of Mormon directions and you go directly east, there is along the Arabian Peninsula a spot that you go to, and there it is, the Land Bountiful, the one spot along the entire coastline that has everything that is described as the Land Bountiful in the Book of Mormon, exactly according to what Nephi said. And so you have 200% proofs of that. But of course, anyone who is against the Church of Jesus Christ, they will ignore that, walk right by. They don't even hand wave. They literally just ignore it completely and say, yeah, but there's no archaeological evidence of the civilizations here in the Americas. I'm sorry. And how much archaeological evidence did you have of the Bible until very recently? And it's had a longer run than what the Book of Mormon have. And how much archaeology has been done in the Americas here? If you're a Heartlander, you're looking from the Mississippi Valley all the way up into Ohio and New York. Let's hear, how much archaeology do you have up there? Not much, but they do have some. And they are in museums up there. And there are people who make good arguments that it's up there. Or if you're someone who believes in the Mesoamerica model, you got people who have they barely scratched the surface down there, and they still have plenty of stuff in archaeological museums down there. Make your arguments. There are good people on both sides of the Mesoamerican and Heartland argument. And good heavens, I said good people on both sides. Oh, I'm so terrible. Oh, what was me? Anyway. The idea is that how do you just blatantly ignore all the proofs for it? Oh, why? Because you want to focus on the detractions. It means you're not looking for truth. You're looking for support for your narrative. Like, I can sit there and say, yeah, I get your arguments. And here are answers to that. But then they just, again, as soon as you give them an answer, as soon as you give them proof, as soon as you give them an answer, they walk right by it. They stop caring because there's some sort of answer to it, and they'll go to their next issue. You can sit there and say, whoa, time out. Time out. You've moved on to your next problem. I get that. We'll get there. But first of all, you have yet to acknowledge, accept, or debate, or work on anything that I've just given you. Whoa. This means what your actions that you are doing is showing that you have zero care for truth. It means that you just want to only find, work on, and focus on that which supports your narrative. So just because there's an absolute true answer to what you're talking about, you want to move on? Come on, dude. Look, I can sit here and all day address this, and eventually we might find something that I may not know something about it, but others might. Anyway, here I am shadowboxing against people who are online. A note on rivers. Before leaving the subject of waters, it would be well to note that Nephi's mention of a river in a most desolate part of Arabia has caused a good deal of quite unnecessary eyebrow-raising. Though Hogarth says that Arabia probably never had a true river in all its immense area, later authorities, including Philby, are convinced that the peninsula has supported some quite respectable rivers, even in historic times. The point to notice, however, is that Lehi made his discovery in the spring of the year, for Nephi's story begins in the commencement of the first year of the reign of Zedekiah, and moves very rapidly with the Jews, and in the Bible, throughout the first month, always refers to the first spring month. In the spring, the desert mountains are full of rushing torrents. The very fact that Nephi uses the term a river of water to say nothing of Lehi's ecstasies at the sight of it, shows that they are used to thinking in terms of dry rivers, the rivers of sand of the East. The biblical expression rivers of water illustrates the point nicely, for the word for river is, in this case, is none of the conventional ones, but the rare afeg, meaning gully or channel. In one of the three instances where the rivers of waters are mentioned in the Bible, the river is actually dried up. See Joel 1:20. In another, they contain not water but tears, Joel 3:18. And talk about, yeah, when you need water and it's not there, yeah, it'll be filled with tears. And in the third, Song 5:12, the proper rendering, as in all modern translation, is water brooks. Only one speaks of rivers of water in a country where rivers do not run all the time. But the spring, it is by no means unusual to find rivers in the regions through which Lehi was moving, as a few examples will show. And this is a really good point as well. And I don't understand why it's so eyebrow-raising. I guess there's plenty of people who are used to rivers like back east where it's always trickling, always running. It's like, dude, live in a desert for a while. Then you'll understand. We descended into Wadi Walea, or Wali Walah. Here was a beautiful sail, S-E-I-L. Ooh, that's a new word for me, sorry. S-E-I-L. Definition. Wow, this is so rarely used, it's not even coming up in my search engine. A Scotch form of steel, I doubt that. Middle English form of sail. Sail. Anyway. Wow. And I try and go to an ad. Jeez. Quit with the ads. I'm just looking for a freaking definition. Now they're really going off into weird things. Come on. They're showing the existence. I just want the definition. Thank you very much. Island? So, okay. There's sail in British English, which is transitive verb. Scottish dialect, to strain. And then there's sail, which means island. I suspect it will be island. Sorry for the aside there, but I wanted to understand what it was saying, because it did not have any clues around it. So we descended into the Wadi Walea. Here was a beautiful sail, one of the sandbanks, an island, quite a little river, dashing over the rocky bed and filled with fish. The stream is a very pretty one, bordered by thickets of flowering oleanders. Here and there it narrows into a deep rushing torrent. That was from Survival of... Anyways, it's a book. Describing the Great Wall that runs like our hurricane... Describing the Great Wall that runs like our hurricane fault in Utah, all along the east side of the Dead Sea, the Araba and the Red Sea, an earlier traveler says, farther south, the country is absolutely impassable, as huge gorges 1,000 to 1,500 feet deep and nearly a mile wide in some places, compare Lehi's awful chasm, are broken by the great torrents flowing in winter over perpendicular precipices into the sea. The sea is the Dead Sea, but the same conditions continue all down the Great Wall to the borders, which are near the Red Sea. One is reminded of how impressed Lehi was when he saw the river of Laman flowing into the fountain of the Red Sea. On the desert road to Petra in the springtime, there are several broad streams to pass, the fording of which creates a pleasant excitement. Yeah, I would say so. So, depending on how fast the water is, it would be very exciting. Oh, very pleasant excitement. A party traveling farther north reports, we presently came upon a deep wadi, Allen, which here cuts the plain in two. How delightful was the splash and gurgle of the living water rushing over its rocky bed in the fierce heat of the Syrian day. Given the right season of the year, then, and the Book of Mormon is obliging enough to give it, one need not be surprised at rivers in the northwestern Arabia. It was this seasonal phenomenon that led Ptolemy to place a river between Yambu and Mecca with perfect correctness. And as Don Bradley points out, it's very likely that the reason for the feast where Laban was drunk, so that Nephi went and was able to cut off his head and grab the plates, was likely Passover, which Passover, for people just not thinking, is kind of like Easter week, Passover week, all same week, guys. So yeah, definitely spring. And Hugh Nibley is mentioning it here, so there you go. That invaluable researcher and indefatigable sleuth, Ariel L. Crowley, has suggested with considerable astuteness that the river of Laman was a very different kind of stream from the rivers of water of which we have been speaking, being nothing less than Necho's canal from the Nile to the Red Sea. The greater part of the Brother Cowley's study is devoted to proving that there was such a canal, but that is no issue, since it is not disputed. What we cannot believe is that the big ditch was Laman's River, and that for a number of reasons of which we need to give only two. While noting that Nephi's account of the Exodus is so precisely worded that it bears the stamp of deliberate careful phrasing, Crowley fails to note that nothing is more precise and specific than Nephi's report on the direction of the march, and that, as we have seen, he never mentions a westerly direction. Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to say you're doing good.
Love you.
How's my friends?
Which must have been taken to reach the place. Brother Crowley assumes that into the wilderness means by the wilderness way to Egypt. First, for the sake of the hypothesis, then without proof as a fact. There is no expression commoner in the East than into the wilderness, which of course is not restricted to any such area. The last place in the word to flee from the notice of men would be to the border of Egypt, which at all times in ancient history was very heavily fortified and closely guarded. See the story of Sinuim. And Lehi, as a member of the anti-Egyptian party, would be the last man in the world to seek refuge in Egypt. He's an anti-Egyptian. That came out of nowhere. I would think that... Okay, so I think Hugh Nibley is saying he's anti-Egyptian because he's thinking that he needs to flee from the political persecutions because he's saying Jerusalem's going to be destroyed, and everyone else is going like, no, we're not going to be destroyed. Egypt has our back. I don't think he's actually like totally against Egypt. I think he's perceived as, it's just like, I think it's the perception of the people who have their faith in Egypt to protect them. He's considered anti-Egyptian, whereas he doesn't really care about Egypt because, hey, he's from the tribe of Ephraim, which means that he's got Josephite blood in him, like Joseph of Egypt. And so there's a lot of connections there that are actually kind of cool and strong. And he had his sons, taught in the language of Egypt to be scribes. So he's not against Egypt per se as a country itself. He's against the people who think that they'll be saved by Egypt because he knows they're going to be destroyed because of their own wickedness. So that's how I would put it to be more exact. It takes a paragraph to explain one word, but there you go. So Lehi, as a member of the anti-Egyptian party, would be the last man in the world to seek refuge in Egypt. I think he just knows that the destruction's coming, and that's not what God wants for him. Especially if Egypt isn't going to back them up. Why in the world would Egypt take him in? Number 2, Crowley calls Necho's canal a mighty stream and says that it lay at the ancient crossroads of continents, perhaps as well known as any place on Earth in 600 BC. Then why wasn't it known to Lehi? It was the greatest engineering triumph of the age, the most important, purely commercial waterway in the world. It lay astride the most traveled highway of antiquity, if not of history, reached by a few days' journey from Jerusalem over a level coastal plain. It was the only great river anywhere near Jerusalem, except for the Nile, of which it was a branch, and yet the stream was unknown to Lehi. Otherwise, it is improbable that he would have given it a new name. In this very fact, says Crowley, lies confirmation of the recent creation of the stream. Just how long does it take news to travel in the East? The canal was at least 10 years old. It had taken years to build, a wonder of the world, an inestimable boon to the world trade. Less than 200 miles from Lehi's doorstep, by a main highway, and yet at the time of ceaseless and feverish coming and going between Egypt and Palestine, neither Lehi, the great merchant, with his sound Egyptian education, nor his enterprising and ambitious sons had ever heard of it. It is impossible to believe that Lehi did not know that if one traveled toward Egypt and came across a mighty stream in a perfectly empty desert, it would not be some unknown and undiscovered watercourse, but really quite an important one. And if anyone knew about Necho's canal, it was Lehi. But we agree with Crowley that the River of Laman was obviously not known to him. Therefore, the two cannot have been the same. No river answering the description of Nephi's could have escaped historical notice in profane works, says Crowley. Why not? It escaped Lehi's notice, steeped as he was in the lore of Egyptians and Jews. It cannot, therefore, have been an important stream, let alone one of the most remarkable on earth, or Lehi would have known about it. Nor does Nephi ever say or imply that it was a great river. It was a waterway. It was not a waterway at all, but a river of water, which is a very different thing. So that was to basically disprove the naysayers of who think, well, that was just Necho's canal. No, it was specifically those things. All right, so we covered the idea of naming things after family members is common. I gave examples of just doing that as in Boy Scouts, but we named it after things instead of people. So naming it after people might be a very Arabian thing. We discussed how people mark themselves through how they live, and we discussed more information about the different rivers and areas around there. We have two other major chapters for Lehi in the desert, which is the city and the sand, and Lehi the winner. Look forward to that. That'll be interesting. And then it's on to the world of Jaredites, which will also be very, very interesting. That one I'm very interested in because, pardon me, what's really fascinating is there are certain things that are casually in the Book of Mormon, but have strong implications for people who also believe in the Bible, because it's another testament of Jesus Christ, and because it's another testament of people's understanding of history from where they came from. What they put in casually has deeper meaning. For example, the Jaredites that came from the Tower of Babel, that implies that the Tower of Babel was real. It's not some fanciful story, but that it literally happened, and this group of people saw that the language was being confounded, and they skedaddled. So it's not just some fanciful thing. That is a very, very big harken back to times original and say something's true. And that is pretty dang cool, in my opinion. So it'd be interesting to sit there and think about, well, I don't really know where the Tower of Babel is. I, in my pure ignorance, just assume, probably like most people, that it has something to do with Babylon, which would be north and northeast of where Jerusalem is currently, or the country of Israel, just kind of in the whole Tigris-Euphrates River area. But at the same time, that may not be where it was. Tradition holds that Noah landed on Mount Ararat. The Apocrypha says that the bones of Adam and Eve were taken with Noah and taken from a far land, cough, cough, somewhere near Missouri, from the flood over to a place far away, which is where, it depends on what traditions you're talking about, because the idea of the Holy Mount, where the original Temple of Solomon was, where you had the stone which the Ark of the Covenant stayed on. There's a lot of traditional history on it. It was like the original threshing floor. I guess that was figures in the story of Ruth. Yeah, or it's also apparently the place where God, Jesus, God, first set foot on dry land on the earth as they were creating it. And so when they say that they made a garden in Eden, it's not from the place that they started creating the earth and the land about it. It was also, so there's a bunch of these traditions that I had no clue about. But thanks to the extracurricular reading of people like Dave Butler, depending on how you want to put it. Because he goes by Dave Butler on the podcast, but he has his book author name as John Butler. So anyway, maybe I should just call him John Butler. Either way, the point is that there's all these interesting traditions that you can find that speak a lot of truth when you understand it in the context, which most of us are clueless about because we only know our own lives. And here we read these things that are steeped in these traditions that we have no clue about. They make sense to us in our own way because there's basic communication that still works. But the idea about the difference between rivers of water versus rivers of sand, etc., for someone who's never lived in a desert, that's weird. For people who have lived or even visited or camped out in the desert, it makes a lot of sense. When they talk about wheat and tares, we're so much a cosmopolitan and city-based society. We're so removed from our agricultural roots that people have to look up all the time. So what in the heck is the tares? Well, it's these weeds that look very similar to wheat until finally the wheat become ripe, and then you can easily take one out without the other. Or all the traditions that go with the Hebrew wedding ceremony. I really am looking forward to a book on that by the lady that was talking with Ward Radio and The Stick of Joseph and these other podcasts, because holy cow, did that just unveil everything that around all these parables that Jesus Christ was talking about. Because it's a central theme that he keeps saying, I'm the bridegroom, the church is the bride, and here we're doing this stuff. It's a huge kind of running motif through all his parables in the New Testament. And if here we are going, la, 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 there's this parable about a coin, and there's this parable about this, and there's this parable about that, and we think they're all separate, but they're actually all part of the same motif. And like I said, it's not terrible, because we still get a lot from that, both spiritually and emotionally speaking. But we're just missing a whole nother layer because we just aren't steeped in that culture. It's like if I were to talk about Star Wars, from the 1980s and 1990s to somebody back in the 1600s, they would have no clue what I am talking about. It'd be like when Luke goes up against Vader, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" Well, okay, so let me just reduce it to its archetypes. There was the father who had been estranged and gone down wicked and evil paths, and the son believed and had hope in him. No, they'd get it still, but would they get the same depth of culture that was communicated through that? Not even close. And that's the same way. Until someone comes along and explains the culture more deeply, and that's why there's the additional books that help out with that. But even then, do we still get the full 100%? I don't know, but at least we got a heck of a lot more. If someone comes up and explains, like, for example, I was discussing with my wife the other day about how Japan sometimes still gets Christmas really wrong. I don't know how for sure that is, because neither of us have actually lived in Japan during Christmas time, but there's this interesting, fun, little tidbits of facts that in Japan, KFC is a Christmas time thing because it just became a traditional thing. And there's stuff that explains how that happened. And there's other funny stuff, like they have Santa Claus on a cross instead of Jesus Christ on a cross, which makes my skin crawl thinking of that. But, there's dumb stuff like that happens. And so they're like, yeah, Japan doesn't quite get Christmas yet. And I'm like, they probably do get Christmas. But there's just funny little idiosyncrasies that crop up because their cultures just acquired it in just a different way. And so, if you think about our Christmas traditions, a lot of it is actually through the lens of northeastern United States, like the whole upstate New York area kind of thing. Why? The whole dreaming of a white Christmas, these great whiteouts and other things like that, and all these beautiful Christmas whiteouts. That's northeastern America Christmas time stuff. That's why we have a lens through that, because that's where we have a huge population of people in New York and New York City. And so there's a lot of Christmas stories that come through that lens. But you go to Southern California at Christmas time, rarely has there been any snow at all. And so it is a very different type of Christmas vibe and feel down there. It is a lot more shopping and just Christmas songs and lights and things, but you don't have much about snow. And it does feel a lot more consumerist. I would know because I was there during Christmas time, at least for 2 years when I was on my mission in San Diego. But even then, you still have the feeling of the traditional American Christmas because, again, we all put up Christmas trees and we dream of snow and think of snow and have it through that lens of the Northeast. So anyways, all of this is to say that despite all our different cultural backgrounds, the more history and critical eye you have to understanding traditions, the actual just awareness beyond just, well, it's just what you do. You have this level 1 awareness of, it just happens. And then there's, I can see that there's this effect on society, which is kind of level 2. And then there's another awareness, level 3, where it's like, there's all this effect on society currently, and we have things like Elf and other modern, Christmas classics, and the fading away of prior Christmas classics. And the extra awareness is the history and the flow of time. Because, people for a long time have regarded Christmas Story as a Christmas classic, which again is told from the Northeastern point of view and from somebody who was growing up as what we'd call now boomers, who are a generation that's swiftly disappearing. So how long is A Christmas Story going to stay one of those Christmas classics? It depends on how strongly people hold to their traditions. Like when they watch Christmas Charlie Brown, or The Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown, or the old Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer classics, or other things like that, or It's a Wonderful Life. That will disappear quickly when the younger generations find no more value in holding to showing these films. it'll just come and stay that Elf will be a Christmas classic. Like, it's a good enough movie. I know lots of people love it. I'm not that guy. So shoot me. But when you have an awareness of the flow of time, and you have awareness of the history of why these cultures happen, and how they interact with the experience that people have, and so as they write about it and you read about it, you can find holes in your knowledge and look for answers, and also you can understand where those holes are being plugged when others who had the same question can help find and answer it for you. I hope you're taking this as ways of enriching the understanding, putting in those holes, answering the questions you never thought to ask, and showing more for certain how true and honest a work the Book of Mormon is, and how true and honest the experience of these people are, and in a way help it point us towards God and showing his mercy to so many of his children and to us. And well, may God be with you.